Blood is supposedly thicker than water, but nobody ever mentions how easily it stains. For years, my older sister wore a mask of absolute perfection, convinced she'd permanently buried her darkest secret. She almost got away with it, until she decided to use my name to hide her own criminal record. Growing up in the Sullivan household meant learning one fundamental rule. Sophia was the sun, and the rest of us were just lucky to be in her orbit. Sophia, or B, as she insisted everyone call her, was 2 years older than me and possessed the kind of striking, effortless beauty that made people instinctively trust her. She was the high school debate captain, the homecoming queen, and my parents' undeniable favorite. I, Alice, was the quiet one. I liked my books, my sketch pads, and staying out of the crossfire. But B's perfection was a carefully constructed facade. Behind closed doors, she was a master manipulator. If she broke a vase, she'd cry and say I pushed her. If she failed a test, it was because I had kept her up all night playing music. My parents, blinded by her outward achievements, swallowed her lies every single time. By the time we reached adulthood, I was completely exhausted, having resigned myself to playing the role of the troubled, difficult sister just to keep the peace. Things reached a boiling point 5 years ago, during what my family now strictly refers to as the Chicago incident. I had just started college, and B was supposedly interning at a prestigious PR firm in the city. In reality, she was spiraling. She was running with a wealthy, reckless crowd, partying every night, and living far beyond her means. One rainy November night at 3 a.m., I got a frantic phone call. It was B, sobbing from a precinct in downtown Chicago. She had been arrested. I won't reveal the exact details of the crime just yet, that comes later, but it was bad. It wasn't a minor traffic violation or a misunderstanding. It was a felony charge. My parents threw unimaginable amounts of money at lawyers to get the charges reduced, secure a plea deal, and wipe the slate clean before her life could be ruined. To protect her reputation, my parents constructed an elaborate lie for our extended family and friends. B had suffered a medical emergency and needed to take a gap year to recover at a private wellness retreat. I was the only one who knew the absolute truth. I was the one who drove to the precinct, paid her bail from my own meager savings, and sat with her in the freezing waiting room. But true to form, within a year, B had rewritten history. She convinced herself and our parents that it was just a minor hiccup, a wrong place at the wrong time situation. Fast forward to the present day. B, now 28, was engaged to Nathaniel Hayes. Nate was everything my parents had ever dreamed of for B. He was a successful architect, hailing from a prominent, old-money Boston family. He was remarkably kind, genuinely grounded, and utterly oblivious to the venom running through his fiancé's veins. He looked at B like she was a saint. The trouble started at a Sunday family dinner at our parents' house, about 3 months before the wedding. I was sitting across from Nate, having a pleasant conversation with him about a recent art exhibit I'd attended. We were laughing, connecting as future brother and sister-in-law should. I saw B's jaw tighten from across the table. She hated when the spotlight shifted away from her, and she despised the idea of Nate forming an independent opinion of me. Alice, maybe you shouldn't have a second glass of wine, B interrupted, her voice dripping with artificial, syrupy concern. She reached over and placed her hand over my glass. You know how you get. We don't want a repeat of Thanksgiving, do we? Nate blinked, confused. What happened at Thanksgiving? Oh, nothing. B sighed heavily, looking at Nate with wide, tragic eyes. Alice just has a hard time regulating herself. It's a struggle we've been helping her through for years. I stared at her, utterly bewildered. I had 2 glasses of champagne at Thanksgiving and went to sleep by 10 o'clock. But my mother chimed in right on cue. We're just very protective of Alice, Nathaniel. She hasn't always made the best choices. I felt my face burn with humiliation. I wanted to scream, to flip the dining table, to tell Nate exactly who was sitting next to him, but I kept my mouth shut. I told myself it was just B being B, securing her territory, maintaining her narrative. I didn't realize that this dinner was just the opening move in a calculated campaign to completely destroy my character. She wasn't just trying to make me look bad. She was setting the stage for a much larger, much more devastating lie. The engagement party was held a month later at the Rosewood Estate, a sprawling, ridiculously expensive country club that Nate's family practically owned. The evening was a masterclass in opulence, towering floral arrangements of white hydrangeas, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and waiters floating through the crowd with trays of caviar and champagne. I had been relegated to errand duty for the evening. B had tasked me with coordinating the vendors, managing the coat check, and ensuring her makeup touch-up kit was always within arm's reach. I didn't mind the work. It kept me away from the suffocating fake smiles and the relentless bragging of our parents. About 2 hours into the party, I slipped out through the French doors toward the rose garden to get a breath of fresh, crisp autumn air. The garden was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the manicured lawns. I was leaning against a stone balustrade, closing my eyes for just a moment of peace, when I heard voices approaching from the gravel path on the other side of the tall hedges. It was Bea and Nate. I froze, instinctively holding my breath, not wanting to interrupt what I assumed was a romantic, private moment. "I just feel so terribly guilty keeping it from you," Bea was saying, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "We promised no secrets, Nate, and you're going to be family now. You deserve to know the truth about the people you're bringing into your life." "Hey, it's okay, darling," Nate said gently. I could hear the rustle of fabric, imagining him wrapping his arms around her. "You can tell me anything. You know that. What's going on? Is it your parents?" "No," Bea sniffled. "It's Alice." My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed myself flat against the stone, straining to hear. "I love my sister. I really do," Bea continued, her voice trembling with a perfect imitation of heartbreak. "But she's dangerous, Nate. You see how quiet she is? It's an act. 5 years ago, she got into some terrible trouble in Chicago. I felt the blood drain from my face. Chicago? What kind of trouble?" Nate asked, his tone shifting from comforting to concerned. "She was working for a logistics company," Bea lied smoothly, her voice barely a whisper. "She embezzled nearly $50,000. She was gambling, doing drugs, running with a horrific crowd. She got caught, Nate. She was convicted." "What?" my mind screamed. I had never worked for a logistics company. I had never stolen a dime in my life. "My God," Nate breathed. "Bea, I had no idea. Is she? Did she serve time?" "6 months in a county facility," Bea whispered, playing her part to absolute perfection. "My parents were devastated. They spent their retirement fund paying the money back so the company wouldn't push for a harsher sentence. That's why we're always so careful around her. That's why she's so defensive. We told everyone she was backpacking in Europe to save her from the stigma, but she's a convicted felon, Nate. And lately, she's been asking my dad for money again. I'm terrified she's relapsing. I didn't want her at the wedding at all, but my parents insisted." "Bea, that is horrible," Nate said, his voice hard. "We have to protect ourselves. We can't have someone like that around our future children, or having access to our home. I'll make sure the security at the wedding is discreet, but aware of her." "Thank you, darling," Bea sighed, sounding immensely relieved. "I knew you'd understand. Just, please don't say anything to her. She's incredibly volatile. She might try to lash out or make up horrible things about me if she knows I told you." I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and practically ran back into the estate, my vision blurring with tears of absolute rage. I pushed through the crowded ballroom, ignoring the strange looks from Nate's elegant relatives, and locked myself inside the first-floor powder room. I gripped the edges of the marble sink, staring at my pale reflection in the mirror. She hadn't just insulted me. She had fabricated a complete, devastating lie to preemptively destroy my credibility. Why? Because I was the only liability she had left. I was the only person who knew that she was the one who was arrested in Chicago. By painting me as a volatile, lying, convicted felon, she ensured that if I ever tried to tell Nate the truth about her past, he would dismiss it as the malicious revenge of a jealous, deranged sister. It was brilliant. It was pure evil. A sharp knock on the bathroom door broke me out of my thoughts. "Alice, are you in there?" It was Bea. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Bea stood there, her perfectly glossed lips curled into a slight frown. "What are you doing hiding in here?" "The photographer wants a family picture by the ice sculpture in 5 minutes. Fix your hair, you look unhinged." She turned to walk away, but I grabbed her wrist. Hard. "I heard you," I said, my voice shaking with a fury I had never felt before. "In the garden, with Nate." Bea froze. For a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed in her blue eyes. But B was a survivor, a chameleon. In the blink of an eye, the panic vanished, replaced by a cold, arrogant sneer. She yanked her wrist out of my grasp and stepped inside the bathroom, locking the door behind her. "Oh, you heard me?" she whispered, her sweet facade completely melting away. "Good. Then you know exactly where you stand." "Are you insane?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "You told him I was a convicted felon. You projected your own arrest onto me. B, you committed grand theft auto and got a DUI. You nearly killed a pedestrian. I was the one who bailed you out. And who is he going to believe?" B challenged, stepping closer to me, her eyes gleaming with malice. "The woman he loves, the daughter my parents adore, or the quiet, weird, pathetic sister who still lives in a studio apartment? Do you really think Nate will take your word over mine?" "I'll tell him the truth," I threatened, though my voice wavered. "Do it," B dared me, tilting her chin up. "Go out there right now and tell him. My parents will back me up. They'll tell Nate that you've always been jealous of me, that you're prone to delusions. They will protect my engagement at all costs, Alice, and you know it. If you open your mouth, you will be permanently cut out of this family. No more holidays, no more financial help from Dad. You will be entirely alone." She was right. My parents would rather die than see B's high society wedding fall apart. They would gaslight Nate. They would gaslight the world. And they would destroy me to keep B on her pedestal. B smiled. A triumphant, wicked thing. She reached out and patted my cheek. "Just smile for the cameras, Alice. And stay out of my way." She unlocked the door and walked back out into the party, leaving me suffocating in her wake. For a long time, I just stood there. I felt defeated, crushed under the weight of a family dynamic that had been suffocating me for 2 decades. I was ready to pack my bags, leave the party, and perhaps just leave my family altogether. But then, as I splashed cold water on my face, a memory surfaced. 5 years ago, on that freezing November night in Chicago, I had been the one to sign the release paperwork. I was the one who was handed the initial police report by a very tired desk sergeant named Officer Davis. My parents had hired their high-powered fixers the very next morning, and those lawyers had made the official records miraculously disappear into sealed files and expunged databases. My parents thought all the paperwork was destroyed. B thought her secret was entirely erased from the earth. But they didn't know about the blue folder. When I moved out of my parents' house 3 years ago, I accidentally packed a stack of old mail and documents from the console of my car. In that stack was the original, unredacted carbon copy of the Chicago Police Department arrest report. It had the date. It had the charges. Grand theft auto, driving under the influence, reckless endangerment, and, most importantly, right at the top, printed in stark black ink, was the name of the perpetrator, Sophia Ann Sullivan. I looked up at my reflection in the mirror one last time. The scared, quiet girl was gone. B had finally pushed me too far, and she had armed me with the exact weapon I needed to destroy her. I wasn't just going to ruin her night. I was going to dismantle her entire life. I dried my face, fixed my hair, and walked out of the bathroom. I had a phone call to make to my roommate, and a very special delivery to arrange for tomorrow's brunch. Sunday morning dawned with a brittle, freezing clarity that perfectly matched my mood. I hadn't slept a single minute. After leaving the engagement party, I had driven straight to a quiet parking lot and dialed my roommate, Harper. I walked her through tearing apart my bedroom closet until she found the battered, fireproof lockbox buried beneath my winter coat. Harper was a godsend. She didn't ask questions when I told her I needed the faded blue folder brought to the city immediately. We arranged a discreet handoff outside the restaurant before I had to endure the obligatory post-engagement brunch. The brunch was being held at the Bristol Lounge, an impossibly chic establishment in Back Bay, known for its mahogany paneling, crystal chandeliers, and clientele who whispered about their trust funds over mimosa flutes. My parents, Robert and Susan, were already seated at a sprawling corner booth when I arrived. They were flanked by Nate's parents, Richard and Eleanor Hayes, who practically reeked of old Boston money. B was sitting next to Nate, looking like an angel descended from heaven in a pristine white silk blouse and delicate pearl earrings. However, the moment I approached the table, the atmosphere shifted. I could feel it instantly. Nate, who just yesterday had been warmly discussing modern art with me, stiffened. He didn't offer his usual friendly smile, merely giving me a curt, tight-lipped nod. Eleanor Hayes subtly shifted her designer handbag closer to her side of the booth as I took the empty seat across from her. Bea had clearly wasted no time poisoning the well. She hadn't just told Nate her fabricated story. She had likely fed the exact same toxic narrative to his entire family. "Alice, darling, you made it, my mother," Susan said, her voice laced with that familiar, forced brightness she reserved for public performances. "We were just ordering." "Bea, sweetheart, tell the waiter what you'd like." "I'll have the smoked salmon, Benedict," Bea said sweetly, turning her dazzling smile on the server. Then, she looked at me with a gaze full of mock pity. "And for my sister, just a club soda with lime, please, and perhaps a side of dry toast. We want to keep things stable today, don't we, Alice?" The implication hung heavily over the table. Eleanor exchanged a deeply concerned glance with her husband, Richard. Nate stared down at his coffee cup, his jaw clenched tight. They all thought I was a recovering addict, a convicted felon teetering on the edge of a violent relapse. "Actually, I'll have a black coffee and the steak and eggs," I told the waiter, my voice perfectly steady. I looked directly into Bea's eyes. "I have a lot of energy to burn today." Bea's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, reaching out to stroke Nate's arm. "You're so brave, Alice. Truly. Navigating your challenges must be exhausting." The brunch progressed in agonizing slow motion. My parents dominated the conversation, loudly boasting about Bea's non-existent accomplishments at her PR firm, painting her as a tireless philanthropist and a brilliant executive. Nate's parents nodded along, clearly thrilled with their son's pristine choice of a bride. Every time I tried to join the conversation, my father would abruptly change the subject, or Bea would interject with a thinly veiled insult disguised as sisterly concern. About halfway through the meal, Bea tapped her spoon against her water glass. "Everyone, if I could just have your attention," Bea announced, her cheeks flushed with manufactured excitement. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Nate and I were talking last night," Bea began, her voice trembling with emotion as she looked at me. "And we realized that our wedding is going to be a very overwhelming environment. We know that in the past, high-stress situations have caused you to make some terrible, illegal choices, Alice. We want you to be healthy." She slid the envelope across the mahogany table toward me. "Nate and I are gifting you a 6-week stay at the Serenity Pines Wellness Center in Vermont," Bea declared, wiping a completely fake tear from her eye. "It's a top-tier rehabilitation facility. We want you to get the professional psychiatric help you desperately need before the wedding. It's our way of showing you that, despite your criminal history, we still love you." Complete silence fell over the table. Eleanor gasped softly, clutching her pearl necklace. My parents beamed at Bea with sickening pride, entirely complicit in this theatrical humiliation. They were willing to let Bea brand me a criminal in front of Boston high society, just to ensure her own halo remained perfectly polished. "Bea, that is the most generous, selfless thing I have ever seen," Eleanor whispered, looking at my sister with absolute adoration. Nate finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "We just want you to get better, Alice. You can't keep living a life of deception and theft." I stared at the thick envelope sitting on the table. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears, but my mind was startlingly clear. This was it. She had backed me into a corner, fully expecting me to cry, to break down, or to run out of the restaurant in shame, thereby confirming every single lie she had just told. Instead, I smiled. "Rehabilitation," I said softly, picking up the envelope and turning it over in my hands. "For my criminal history, for my theft and my deception." "Don't be defensive, Alice," my father warned, his tone taking on a sharp, threatening edge. "Your sister is trying to save your life. Accept the gift gracefully." "Oh, I think someone at this table definitely needs an intervention," I replied, my voice carrying a quiet authority that made my mother flinch. "But it isn't me." I reached down into my leather satchel resting by my feet. My fingers brushed the cool, rigid edge of the blue folder Harper had handed me outside. I pulled it up and dropped it squarely in the center of the table, right on top of Bea's envelope. The heavy thud made the silverware rattle. "What is this?" Nate asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "That, Nathaniel, is the truth, I said, leaning back in my chair. B told you last night that I was arrested in Chicago 5 years ago. She told you I embezzled money, that I was a convicted felon, and that our parents drained their retirement to keep me out of prison. B's face drained of all color. The smug, radiant bride-to-be vanished, replaced by a pale, terrified ghost. Alice, stop it right now, she hissed, her voice dropping its sweet register. Dad, make her stop. She's having a psychotic episode. Open the folder, Nate, I commanded, ignoring her. Nate hesitated, glancing at B's panicked face, then reached out and flipped open the blue cover. Inside sat the original, unredacted, pink and yellow carbon copy of a Chicago Police Department arrest report from District 18. It was dated November 14th, 5 years prior. The top of the page bore the unmistakable, heavy black seal of the precinct. Let's read the details together, shall we? I offered calmly. Arresting officer, Sergeant Michael Davis, badge number 4409. Incident location, the intersection of North Clark and West Kinsey. The perpetrator blew a 0.19 on the breathalyzer after crashing a stolen 2018 Mercedes-Benz G-Class into a city light pole, narrowly missing a pedestrian. Alice, that is enough, my father roared, half standing from the booth, his face purple with rage. You will not ruin your sister's special day with your delusional lies. They aren't lies, Robert. Richard Hayes suddenly intervened, his voice booming with the authority of a seasoned corporate litigator. He reached over his son's shoulder and pulled the document closer. Richard's eyes narrowed as he scanned the paperwork. This is a legitimate police intake form. It has the correct precinct routing codes for Cook County. It's a forgery, Bee shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently. She printed it off the internet. She's trying to frame me because she's jealous of my wedding. Is she? Nate asked. His voice was deathly quiet. He pulled the paper back from his father and stared at the top line. His eyes flicked up to look at Bee, and the devastation in his expression was absolute. The perpetrator's name listed here. It isn't Alice. He turned the paper around so the entire table could see the stark, typed letters. Defendant, Sullivan, Sophia Ann. No, Eleanor breathed, pressing a hand to her mouth in horror. Bee. Nate, listen to me. Bee begged, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, born of pure, unadulterated panic. She reached for him, but he physically recoiled, pulling his arm out of her reach. My parents took care of it. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Alice is a monster for bringing this up. A mistake? Nate repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. You told me your sister was a felon. You looked me dead in the eye in the garden last night and told me she was dangerous. You projected your own felony arrest, your own DUI, onto her to cover your tracks. Nathaniel, please, my mother pleaded, reaching across the table. Bee was young. She was struggling. We expunged the record to protect her future. Alice had no right to steal this document. Ah, Richard Hayes said coldly, leaning back in his chair and looking at my parents with absolute disgust. So you actively participated in defrauding my son. You sat here and let this woman assassinate her sister's character to hide the fact that you raised a criminal. The silence that followed was deafening. The other patrons in the restaurant had stopped eating, blatantly staring at the spectacular implosion of the Sullivan family. Nate stood up, throwing his linen napkin onto his untouched plate. He looked at Bea as if he were seeing a complete stranger. You didn't just lie to me, Bea. You tried to destroy your own blood to protect a lie. You were going to send her to a fake rehab center today, just to sell the con to my parents. Nate, I love you, Bea sobbed, standing up and grabbing his blazer. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Don't ever contact me again, Nate said, peeling her fingers off his jacket with chilling finality. He turned to his parents. Mom, Dad, we're leaving. Call the wedding planner and cancel everything. Eleanor and Richard stood in unison, not sparing my parents a second glance as they walked out of the Bristol lounge. Nate followed them, but paused briefly beside my chair. For what it's worth, Alice, Nate said softly. I ran a background check on you this morning after what she said last night. You came back completely clean. I was sitting here waiting to see how far she would take the lie. I'm so sorry your family did this to you. With that, he walked out the heavy glass doors, taking Bea's perfectly crafted future with him. Bea collapsed into the leather booth, burying her face in her hands, wailing hysterically. My mother was rushing to comfort her, stroking her hair, while my father glared at me with a hatred so deep it was practically radioactive. "You are dead to us," my father spat venomously. "Do you hear me? You are no longer a part of this family." I stood up, slinging my satchel over my shoulder. I looked at the three of them, a twisted, toxic knot of enablers and narcissists who had finally been exposed to the harsh light of day. "That," I said calmly, leaving a $20 bill on the table for my coffee, "is the best wedding gift Bea could have ever given me." I walked out of the restaurant and stepped into the crisp Sunday air. For the first time in my entire life, I could finally breathe. Navigating toxic family dynamics can be incredibly isolating, but exposing the truth is always the ultimate victory. If this story resonated with you or someone you know, please hit that like button and share this video to help spread awareness about the reality of narcissistic abuse. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell for more real-life, dramatic storytelling. What would you have done in Alice's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.